In a quiet, picturesque neighborhood nestled on the outskirts of a bustling city, life seemed perfect. Tree-lined streets and well-manicured lawns painted an idyllic picture of suburban bliss. At the heart of this community was the Homeowners Association, or HOA, an organization formed to uphold standards and maintain property values. Residents were drawn to the idea of a harmonious neighborhood, where rules ensured that everyone kept their homes in pristine condition. However, beneath this facade of tranquility lay a more complex reality. The HOA wielded significant power, enforcing strict regulations on everything from paint colors to landscaping choices. For many residents, these rules provided a sense of security and order, but for others, like our protagonist, they felt suffocating and intrusive. The HOA's insistence on conformity and its tendency to punish those who dared to stray from the norm created an atmosphere of unease. While some neighbors embraced the HOA structure, others quietly resented it, believing it stifled individuality and personal freedom. Our protagonist, a fiercely independent spirit, chose not to join the HOA, valuing autonomy over compliance. Little did they know that this decision would ignite a conflict that would change their life forever. As tensions simmered between those who supported the HOA and those who sought independence, the stage was set for a dramatic confrontation that would escalate far beyond mere disagreements over property lines and regulations. The decision not to join the HOA was not taken lightly. For our protagonist, it stemmed from a deep-seated belief in personal freedom and the right to govern one's own property. They had seen firsthand how the HOA enforced its rules with an iron fist, punishing those who dared to express their individuality. The thought of living under such constraints felt stifling, like a cage around their creativity and lifestyle. As a judge, the protagonist valued justice and fairness above all else. They believed that community governance should be about collaboration and mutual respect, not coercion and threats. The HOA's aggressive tactics, like hefty fines or minor infractions, felt like an abuse of power. They couldn't support an organization that prioritized conformity over community spirit. Many neighbors questioned protagonist's choice, bewildered by their refusal to conform. Some believed joining the HOA was simply part of living in this neighborhood. Others viewed it as a way to protect their investments. But our protagonist stood firm, reasoning that true community should embrace diversity rather than impose uniformity. In conversations with friends and family, they often expressed concerns about the implications of joining. What if they were forced to sacrifice their values for the sake of peace? This internal struggle intensified their resolve. The protagonist was prepared to face the consequences of their choice, unaware that this stand would soon lead them down a tumultuous path filled with unexpected challenges and revelations. As days turned into weeks, the tension between our protagonist and the HOA escalated dramatically. Initially, it started with subtle signs, disapproving glances from neighbors and whispered conversations that halted as they approached. The HOA board, feeling threatened by the protagonist's refusal to conform, began to take more overt actions. They issued a series of warnings about minor infractions, from an untrimmed hedge to a decorative garden gnome that had somehow breached their aesthetic code. With each notification, the protagonist felt increasingly cornered. They responded with calm explanations about their right to personal expression, but the HOA's response was anything but understanding. Instead of engaging in constructive dialogue, board members resorted to intimidation tactics, hinting at potential fines and legal action if compliance was not achieved. As the pressure mounted, other residents began to take sides. Some expressed support for the protagonist's stance, admiring their courage to stand up against what they perceived as bullying. Others sided with the HOA, fearing the repercussions of dissenting against an organization that held significant influence over community life. This divide created an atmosphere thick with mistrust and suspicion. The protagonist soon realized that this was no longer just about landscaping choices or associations. It was a battle for autonomy in a community that thrived on conformity. With mounting anxiety and determination, they decided it was time to confront the HOA directly, unaware that such a confrontation would set off a chain of events leading to catastrophic consequences. One fateful night, after a particularly heated exchange with the HOA board, the unthinkable happened. The protagonist returned home from dinner to find their house engulfed in flames. The flickering orange glow illuminated the darkness, casting an eerie light on the panic that gripped the neighborhood. As firefighters scrambled to douse the raging inferno, onlookers gathered, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. The protagonists stood frozen, heart racing as they watched years of memories and hard work consumed by fire. Within moments, it became clear that this was no mere accident. It felt like a targeted act of aggression. Rumors began to swirl among neighbors, some whispering about the HOA's potential involvement, while others dismissed them as unfounded conspiracy theories. But for our protagonist, a chilling connection began to form. In the days that followed, the investigation unveiled troubling findings. Evidence suggested that the fire had been deliberately set, raising questions about motive and intent. The protagonist's mind raced with possibilities. Could this be retaliation for their refusal to join the HOA? Had they become a target for standing up against an organization that thrived on control? With mounting fear and determination, they resolved to uncover the truth behind this devastating act. As they delved deeper into the investigation, it became evident that this incident was more than just a personal loss. It was a reflection of a community at war, where power dynamics were shifting dangerously and lives were at stake. As the investigation into the arson progressed, details about the protagonist's past began to surface. Unbeknownst to many in the neighborhood, they were not just an ordinary resident. They were a respected judge with years of experience in the legal system. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community, especially among the HOA members who had previously underestimated their opponent. The news spread like wildfire, reshaping perceptions overnight. Neighbors who once viewed the protagonist with skepticism now saw them in a different light, someone with authority and a deep understanding of justice. However, this newfound respect came with its own set of complications. The HOA, fearing backlash from an individual with legal expertise, grew increasingly defensive and erratic in their actions. For the protagonist, the discovery of their background became both a shield and a sword. While it granted them credibility and support from some neighbors who were eager to take a stand against the HOA's bullying tactics, it also painted a target on their back. They realized that their role as a judge could either help dismantle the oppressive dynamics of the HOA or escalate tensions further. With this duality in mind, the protagonists decided to leverage their legal knowledge strategically. They began gathering evidence of the HOA's misconduct, planning to expose their corruption and misuse of power. As they navigated this treacherous path, they felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to confront not just those responsible for fire, but also the very foundations of control that had plagued their community. With the flames of destruction still fresh in their memory, the protagonists plunged into the investigation of the arson that had left them homeless. Drawing on their expertise as a judge, they began to systematically gather evidence. They interviewed neighbors, collected photographs from the scene, and reviewed security footage from nearby homes. Each piece of information added weight to their growing suspicion that the HOA was involved. As they delved deeper, conversations with other residents revealed a troubling pattern. Several neighbors recounted similar experiences: threatening letters, vague warnings about property standards, and even instances of harassment when they sought to voice their concerns. The protagonist meticulously documented these accounts, recognizing that this was not just a personal vendetta, but a broader pattern of intimidation aimed at silencing dissent. The investigation also led them to connect with local law enforcement, where they shared their findings and urged a thorough inquiry into the HOA's practices. To their surprise, some officers expressed skepticism about the HOA's involvement, viewing it as too far-fetched. But the protagonists remained undeterred. They knew that power often masked corruption. As days turned into weeks, tension mounted between the protagonist and the HOA. The board grew increasingly anxious about what the investigation might uncover. In clandestine meetings, they plotted ways to discredit the protagonist and maintain control over the community. Equipped with both determination and legal acumen, our protagonist was ready to expose the truth behind the flames that had destroyed their home and challenge an organization that had long held sway over their lives. The time had come for a confrontation. Fueled by the evidence they had meticulously gathered, the protagonist requested a meeting with the HOA board, determined to hold them accountable for their actions. As they stepped into the conference room, tension crackled in the air. Board members sat with expressions ranging from defiance to apprehension, clearly aware of the stakes. With a steady voice, the protagonists laid out their case. They presented the collected testimony from neighbors, detailed accounts of harassment, and even shared security footage that was eerily absent during the HOA's previous discussions. The room fell silent as they outlined how these actions culminated in their home being destroyed. Each word was deliberate, resonating with an authority that came from both their legal background and personal experience. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging glances filled with anxiety. One member, a particularly vocal advocate for strict enforcement, attempted to dismiss the allegations as unfounded paranoia. But this only fueled the protagonist's resolve. They challenged the board's narrative, insisting that it was time for accountability and transparency. As voices rose and arguments intensified, it became clear that this wasn't just a debate over property rules. It was a clash of ideals, individual freedom versus oppressive control. The confrontation reached a boiling point when the protagonist warned that legal action would follow if changes were not implemented within the HOA. As they left the meeting, a sense of empowerment surged through them. They were no longer an isolated figure. They had become a symbol of resistance against an organization that had long dominated their lives. In the wake of the confrontation, the protagonist decided to take decisive legal action against the HOA. Leveraging their position as a judge, they filed a lawsuit accusing the board of harassment, intimidation, and ultimately being complicit in the arson that had destroyed their home. This move sent shockwaves through the community, igniting fierce debates among residents about the role of the HOA and their authority. As news of the lawsuit spread, opinions within the neighborhood began to polarize. Some residents rallied behind the protagonist, inspired by their courage to stand up against what many viewed as tyrannical governance. They organized meetings to discuss reforming the HOA's practices, pushing for more transparency and accountability. The momentum built as neighbors shared their own stories of intimidation and unfair treatment at the hands of the board. However, there were also those who remained staunch supporters of the HOA, fearing that a legal battle would destabilize the community and diminish property values. They painted the protagonist as a troublemaker, insisting that joining the HOA was essential for maintaining order and harmony. This group took to social media to voice their opinions, amplifying divisions within the neighborhood. As court dates approached, tension mounted, with both sides preparing for a showdown that would not just decide the fate of one individual, but could reshape the entire community. The protagonist stood resolute, aware that this fight was about more than just their home. It was about reclaiming justice and protecting individual rights against an organization that had long wielded unchecked power. As the legal battle unfolded, the protagonist began the arduous process of rebuilding not just their home, but their life. With the support of sympathetic neighbors, they secured temporary housing and gathered resources to help navigate the long journey ahead. Each day brought new challenges, but their determination fueled a resilience that inspired those around them. The protagonist took an active role in designing their new home, focusing on elements that reflected their individuality and values, a stark contrast to the rigid standards of the HOA. As construction began, they often visited the site, finding solace in progress and imagining a future filled with warmth and laughter. The act of rebuilding became a cathartic experience, allowing them to reclaim their sense of agency after the devastating loss. Amidst this personal revival, the protagonist also worked tirelessly to foster community support. They organized neighborhood gatherings, where residents could share stories and discuss collective actions against the HOA's overreach. These meetings transformed into forums for empowerment, reminding everyone that unity was essential in facing adversity. As more residents joined the movement for reform, it became clear that the HOA's grip on power was beginning to loosen. Through this journey of resilience, the protagonist discovered, armed with undeniable evidence, the protagonist's legal expertise shone through, compelling the jury and the judge to see beyond the surface a simple dispute over property rights. In a landmark ruling, the court found in favor of the protagonist. The HOA was ordered to pay reparations for damages and to reform its policies. This decision sent ripples throughout the community, marking a significant victory against an organization that had long wielded unchecked power. Residents erupted in celebration, feeling a renewed sense of hope and empowerment. reflecting on their tumultuous journey. The protagonists realized that they had not just fought for their home, but for the very essence of community, a space where individuality and collaboration could coexist. They understood that resilience was not just about personal strength. It was about lifting others alongside you. With their new home finally completed, they hosted a gathering that symbolized unity and renewal. Neighbors who had once felt afraid to speak out now shared their stories openly, forging bonds that would strengthen their community for years to come. As they looked around at the faces filled with hope and gratitude, the protagonists felt a profound sense of fulfillment. They had transformed their tragedy into a catalyst for change,